What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hartness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Tanja Murphy-Ilibasic, and we speak about the dynamics in workshops. We speak about how we can actually collaborate better with clients, even if they don't have the spirit of collaboration and what it needs to follow through with the workshop results just yet. So how can we create more sustainable workshops and results and really empower the group to take ownership of what they have created throughout the day? Tanja speaks also a lot about her presence, her physical presence, and how she shows up, and how her presence and how she holds her body as in relationship to the group over the course of her workshop, and how she slowly disappears. And at the end, we speak about, the participants and the dynamics and our role as facilitators when we call out behavior that we actually don't want to see, and the shifts that become possible if we do show up with such a courage. So I hope you enjoyed the show. Stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And still, I hope that you will enjoy our conversation. Hello, Tanja. Welcome back to the show, I should say.
Thank you so much, Miriam. As I said a moment ago, you're looking wonderful with your new hairstyle, all bright and effervescent as you always are. And it's a pleasure to be back. Really, I can't tell you, I've been so looking forward to this conversation since we last spoke.
Yeah, and we last spoke when the pandemic just broke out. And we're part of a global initiative of online collaboration. And I think you were the person back then who gave me a tutorial on how to use breakout rooms on Zoom, because I had never created a breakout room before.
I believe that might be correct, yes. Yes. And it was, interestingly, the topic came up in LinkedIn this week, I think, and it was not something that I had paid any attention to when this all kicked off and which dates. I'd have to really think about it. But it came up, and just considering everything that's changed within the meantime, how the face of facilitation has changed within the meantime is incredible. It's very hard to get your head around it.
It is, especially since then we came together, this collective, because we thought we all lost our clients, and we all thought, oh, is our profession going to die? Are our businesses going to die? And actually the exact opposite happened, because we could inform the public how important facilitation is when the world goes remote.
Absolutely. And I really believe that that whole constellation repositioned the art of facilitation. Yes, there's still lots of work to do, and I just have incredible admiration for your efforts in every way, just step by step, to try and differentiate facilitation to other skills in working with people. But I think really that was a moment for many organizations that they grasped that facilitation is a skill set and that it's not training and it's not coaching. So this differentiator, that opened up, I'd say, there, and it really needed something like that to make that possible.
Absolutely. So thank you, Holger Nauheimer.
Yes.
If you're listening, for putting that together. And let me rewind a little bit. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator, capital F?
Interestingly, this is many, many years ago, because my first corporate role was working with British Petroleum, which as a multinational, in some ways was well ahead of many other organizations. And being British, facilitation is a term that is used standardly and frequently, and the whole differentiation between what an engagement needs and the goals that are envisaged would clearly differentiate between the trainer, the facilitator, or whatever. So I would have to say this would probably have been in about 1996.
I'm curious in different areas now. I never thought of the fact that, as a British person, where facilitation is a word, is a concept in your language, how does it benefit, or maybe even can be in the way when you speak about facilitation with a capital F as a thing and not as a normal verb that you might use in different contexts?
So I think in an English-speaking environment where it is established as a concept, it has both variations, the verb and the capital F, the noun. When you're working with other languages in other countries where it's not established as a term, and I mean the typical one, as you know, I'm based in Germany, so the word they're using here, Moderator, Moderatorin, is worlds apart from what that is. So I find it very difficult to capture in words an understandable meaning of facilitation. Sometimes I don't even really try, and I just go back to the standard term of Referentin, which is just a very vague, open description of who you are and what you do. It doesn't define you, because if it's not a concept in a culture or in a language, how can you describe it? And it sounds so woo-woo when you try to describe it.
This is very true. And to make a process easier, to help a group to communicate better is very difficult to grasp. Yeah.
Yes, and it doesn't sound as though you're bringing value, and that, in fact, this could be the greatest value that they need, or the greatest support that they need in what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Getting people to emerge themselves in the process and co-own the process and participate. But I find it very difficult and often avoid the conversation, indeed, to be honest.
So how do you then approach your clients, or what is the education bit maybe that you have to do with them for them to understand? And I can only assume that your benefit could be that you have started in-house for British Petroleum. So you do know how facilitation looks like from within a company. And maybe you picked up some words or some strategies on how to educate your new clients.
Yeah, so educate, this is a bit of an anti-word for me, because it sounds like here I am, all-knowing, the encyclopedia has entered the room type of thing. So,
which is the opposite of a facilitator.
Yes, exactly. So I struggle with the word, to be honest with you. Very sort of power over feeling. And also it sounds then like really it's a cure-all, which it's not. Facilitation is not always the thing that you need. Sometimes you need standard training, or you need coaching. So it's a hard one for me to answer, because when I'm working with clients, the key topic for me is to truly understand what is it that they need, and where do they want to, what would be an ideal outcome that we're striving for, understanding the group dynamics, the dynamics between, often because in the work I do, it's leaders working with the teams or not working with the teams, however you want to view that. And then just taking the path that is the right one, making proposals of, so if we achieve this, is this something you're looking for? So if I've understood correctly, so I don't actually go very into this differentiation, as I said. We talk about different aspects. Maybe it's breaking down the actual engagement into different blocks and what we're going to take out of the blocks, how that flows into the next section and why, but without labeling it.
Yeah. And then it sounds like a collaborative process with a client, to really not thinking of what is the product they need, but what is the desired outcome.
Yes.
And
exactly.
then you help them see what are the tools you would apply and bring in to achieve that outcome.
And I have a wonderful example where this is a complete disaster.
Yes, please share. We love
such an interesting experience. So with a team of other coaches, we were approached to do something for SAP. And it was one of the global teams, sales, if I'm not mistaken, and they were based all over the place geographically, and it was a whole series of workshops. We needed multiple people to do it. So then we met with the Orga team multiple times and attempted to understand, where is the journey going? What are they trying to achieve? Is this just a feel-good exercise? That could have been. It was also potentially around the second lockdown period, something like that. So, and what are they striving for? And it was a very sticky process, I have to say. There were no clear answers, a lot of silence on the calls. And I'd say that we're generally, people who are relatively easy to speak to. So that surprised me a lot. We did the engagement. We had then, I think it was 2 or 4 workshops. I can't remember exactly. But anyway, so we did everything and it worked well. The feedback was also positive. And then we had a closeout meeting with the team. And that was the first time they said, we found it quite difficult to work with you all, which was a bit of a slap in the face. And they said, because we just wanted you to do it.
Ooh.
All of your questions were very time consuming. And our expectation had been that you just do it. So this was more of a training concept. And we weren't thinking training. So they were happy with the end product. However, they were not happy with the collaboration.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, we were all sitting there, jaws on the desk type of thing, quite astounded. But it really made me think there's so many different perspectives. You can never assume and you can never assume that what you propose is going to be something that they can even work with or imagine or want.
Yeah. And I wonder, thank you for the example.
So it was and a very enlightening one for me too, yes.
Yeah. And I wonder whether you would have achieved this pleasant outcome so that they would be as happy with the outcome with a different approach.
I don't believe so. Personally, this is only my personal opinion, because there was information that was critical to how we work with these different geographical groups, and particularly because it was many cultures that were coming together, but the workshop content wasn't allowed to change. So we had to be sensitive to the topics we brought in and how we engage with the people and what information we expect them to share with us. So I found it very beneficial, but it was very hard work. I've never encountered that with an organizational team. Oh, well, I have, but okay, different story. Not going down that road, but for different reasons. Yeah.
And then I wonder whether, as facilitators, are we sometimes maybe forcing too much collaboration or this collaborative spirit on our clients where, like in your example, sometimes it's not wanted, or maybe in other times it's not even needed. And how do we know?
Yes, and appropriate is the word that springs to my mind.
Ooh. What do you mean by that?
So my view is you're brought in to support some sort of an individual, organization, group, whatever it may be. At the end of the day, you're going to step away and they should be in a position to work better together, to be more productive, effective, whatever the goals are, right? What outcome are you targeting? Now, if you come in and this is such an entirely different approach to what they're used to and what they're going to be able to maintain, where is the benefit of that? So being, again, I suppose I would call it realistic to when I leave, when I'm gone, what is the environment going to look like? What is their dynamics? Or how will can that even impact the dynamics? Or will it be a very, very rigid environment that doesn't allow for that?
Yeah.
Then it's like giving people a glimpse of something that isn't attainable.
Yeah. And in this case, I wonder actually whether you would rather need a more collaborative approach. Because when I think of leaving a space in a way that they can continue to work with what they've learned, they need to learn the collaboration and they need to feel like part of it. And then I think it's even more difficult to enable them to continue with the work once we left if what we do is only a traditional training without the collaborative approach.
So that's not quite how I meant it. So thank you for bringing it up, because the way I'm thinking of it is, if I am the major factor holding this form of collaboration together and I remove myself from the equation and it's going to collapse, then that's the wrong approach.
Yeah.
If there's nobody who can own this, step in, that the participants have really started to embody some elements of it, and you now know it's now theirs, it's not yours. You're not the key figure. And I think that this is something, it's sometimes the lines are a little bit blurred, because there are lots of things you could do with teams, and you think like, oh, if we could do this would just be so beneficial for them. But once again, if it would not be livable without you personally, then you're doing them a disservice, is the way I would say it.
So thank you for clarifying. This makes a lot of sense. How would you prepare them? Or is there kind of a red flag that if you have the impression that they want you to do it, you to carry all the weight and the responsibility, and then there's no one to take over, would this be a red flag where you're like, I cannot serve you? Or
then I would just have that open conversation with them. Are there people here within this constellation who would be interested in supporting me, in maybe taking over small elements of it to get a feel for what it is? But in the actual engagements itself, I'd be very honest about, we're going to do something and we're going to see how you feel about it. And then we're going to do later on, often it's multiple day engagements, which is, of course, is great because you have then the opportunity to practice things or apply them. And then we're going to do a smaller, simplified exercise tomorrow. And I'm in the background. I'm taking a back seat in this one. And we have your two lovely colleagues who are going to run the session.
Yeah. And then they have the opportunity to grow into it.
Exactly.
And it's more of a capacity building role that we then also take. And this makes me wonder whether as facilitators, what we often neglect, and I would include myself in that, is the process of talking with the client, what happens after we leave and what is the budget that they actually need. Because I think it is beautiful to have these interventions and workshops and maybe multiple day, maybe even an entire project. And then we do leave and then the work has to happen, especially after a workshop. And now that I'm thinking about it, I've rarely talked with a client about, do you actually have the budget to realize any of the ideas or any of the things we will be working on during the workshop?
Exactly. And that's why it's so critical to have enough conversations with the client and to be clear in where we're going, how you're planning to work. So I don't mean super detailed explanations, but we have a framework that I could imagine would work marvelously for your people. However, to make this work long term, it's going to need more experience and potentially a little bit of support for some internal people to be able to use it in the way that you'd like to have. Now, that is the engagement we're talking about, and it is post-engagement support. Is that even of interest? Because if then they say, we have the money for the engagement, we have this event, we have money for that, no, there will be no follow-up or follow-through, then I'm not a fan of, I think that as facilitators, we often have the ability to make people feel incredibly good, real highs, right?
Yeah.
But if you're really high, you can fall really low.
Yes, that's very
and we
true.
carry that responsibility.
Yeah.
And
especially
it needs to be something else.
Yeah. And I think there's a reason why there is something like a workshop fatigue in organizations, that participants feel reluctant to really come in and to lean into it because they have experienced the deep fall.
Exactly.
And
I think
nothing happens afterwards. And then I can understand the frustration. Why would I spend energy and time on a workshop if nothing happens afterwards anyway?
Indeed. And that's such a good point that you're bringing up, because it's not just that they've experienced that might have been over many, many years, the standard procedure. Time is taken away from you. You're sent off somewhere. You have to attend. You have to collaborate and engage during the whole process. And what happens at the end of it? Nothing. You've lost time, and there's more work waiting for you when you get back.
Yeah. And then what is the best way to do that? Because I think we somehow have a responsibility, not only towards the group, but actually towards our entire profession. Because if this continues, we all suffer from it.
Yes.
And I do see the short-term problem, the short-term trade-off between, I can have this client. Of course, I want a client. I can smell and sense that nothing will happen afterwards, but it is the short-term goal. Whereas the long-term is, nothing will happen afterwards, and I might harm myself and the profession in the long term.
The danger is, I love it that you mentioned this, because the failure of the workshop is going to be whose fault?
Always, as a facilitator.
Always. It's always going to be down to the facilitator. So I think setting yourself up for failure is something you need to be clear about in your own mind. Yes, it would be easy to win the contract. Yes, it would be easy to do. No, I don't believe anything at all is going to change afterwards. And then what are people going to say about you? It's your reputation that has to carry.
Yeah. And then I wonder, what would be the alternative? So there must be something in between, right? There must be something that we can communicate to the group and say, okay, let's do this activity, and knowing, or at least anticipating, that nothing will happen afterwards. How can this still be beneficial?
Well, that's where the goal setting is so critical. So when I speak to clients, we talk about the engagement, the event, intervention, whatever it may be, but we look then beyond it. So in 3 months' time, what do you want to see? What are you hoping to see? In 6 months' time, what are you hoping to see? So that already indicates whether they've thought beyond that, or if they're just ticking a box.
Yeah.
And if it's a box ticking exercise, then that is an internal conversation of, okay, is that okay for me? Do I think that the group, it will still be beneficial? And how could it be most beneficial, even if I just give them tools or reflections or whatever it may be to simply help them at an individual level?
Yeah.
Then is the benefit big enough to say, okay, yes? Because if I'm not motivated, I can't do anything.
Yeah. I think that's the most important part, right? Because at the end of the day, it's our energy that will be contagious.
Totally. And I'm a really high energy person, but if I have no energy, then this is most certainly not going to work. Yeah.
And if we cannot see the impact or the possibility or the hope, then what's the point? And I love what you say, that even if there is maybe no future, so how can we create an impact on the individual, on the personal level, maybe spark some opportunity or some hope of how they can contribute to the organizational culture, even without the leadership or without the budget, or at least just changing something in their team or in their families or in their private lives.
Exactly. Simply building their own resilience, for instance, to a constantly changing environment, to an environment that never changes, that's incredibly frustrating, and helping them maintain a healthy balance of being the professional that they need to be, and also being able to walk away from work at the end of the day and enjoy the non-work related activities that they have, and not be weighed down and sleepless. So there's these sorts of considerations where frequently I simply think, so what could we achieve for the people if this is a box ticking exercise, which is usually pretty clear? They have the budget has to be used, and we need to solve this, and it's completely insane what they're saying. But at least you can consider what impact. That is, for me, the critical thing. I can't do things that have no lasting impact or effect on people.
Yeah. And I think in a workshop, even if we're not solving the big problem, the long-term issue, we can help them to find ways to work better together by working on the apparently bigger issue.
An example sprang to mind, a group that I'm working with that has, I would just openly say, quite a dysfunctional way of engaging with each other, and very unhealthy and painful dynamics within the team. And we had a workshop recently, and at that time it wasn't clear, would there be a follow-up workshop? But my goal was to help them experience, this is how we could work together without any fancy tools or without any skills that need a long time to learn, just to see this is how it could feel. And that was really a breakthrough moment for the team, that we can be that same constellation of people, but we don't have to have all this tension. It can be different.
What was the small thing with a big impact that where would you start to give them the sense of hope and ownership?
Okay, so in this case, I literally stepped in and interrupted somebody who was being incredibly aggressive towards other members of the group without any provocation at all. And it's a situation I've never experienced to that extent before. But as soon as this started, I just stepped in and timed out the whole conversation.
Oh, wow.
Literally with okay, stop. Okay, let's just discuss how we're going to engage with each other, because this is not the way. And then we had a little conversation, but I know that sounds as though I'm being very sort of like top down teacher like.
And sometimes it's okay.
Well, to stop the escalation, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to be firm, but then to have really a conversation that is acceptable for the person who had escalated, the people impacted. The group was astounded that I interrupted, because they've never experienced that before, although this is how the interaction in the team is. Yeah. So, but then we had a very good conversation about, so very briefly touching on, why do people escalate? What happens when you escalate? What are you aware of? How do the others experience it? And I brought in a couple of examples where I get impacted. I think you and your own, I know everyone's always talking about vulnerabilities, which is a word I dislike, but it doesn't matter. It's just a word. I just wish the word were a different word, then I'd use it. But just being honest, we all make mistakes. And there's been enough written and spoken about it, but it is a way to connect to other people. So even the person who had definitely, I would say, her interaction was just so out of line and inappropriate and unprofessional. Even she was then on board.
And how did you confront that? So you called a time out. I find this amazing and so important. How did you deal with the situation that this person wouldn't get defensive, offended, that it didn't escalate even further?
Yeah. So if I recall correctly, I turned to her and I said, I totally understand how frustrating this whole situation must be.
Mm-hmm.
But can I ask you just to keep in mind, the frustration isn't with us now. It's external frustration. And you're exhibiting it now here in this room. So it's not us that are in conflict with each other. We're in conflict with the group, with the whole situation for the entire division.
Yeah.
And that helped her step back a little.
Yeah. So basically creating or acknowledging how she feels, not making her feel alone, not dismissing her.
No, not at all. And none of the sort of, finger waggling, you naughty person type of approach. Yeah. Everyone has a reason why they behave in a certain manner. So here, there's lots again spoken about not being judgmental. So don't be judgmental. Don't pretend you know what's going on with this person. But you as the facilitator can see that the entire conversation has broken down here and everyone else had retreated, literally. It was like they were pinned to the walls, basically. Yeah. That was the feeling in the room. And that's what we needed to bring everybody back around the table and have the open conversation with each other. And yes, everyone's frustrated. We just show our frustration differently.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, everyone's frustrated. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But how do we have the conversation without excluding other people?
And how to ensure that the frustration, as you said, the frustration is about something outside. And how can we leave it outside? But then what would then be a way for the team to acknowledge that the frustration is then outside, and how to leave it at the door? You have then a ritual to first vent together or to call each other out? Or
if I think about this group, it's a very challenging situation because it's a combination of people who are quite loud and participative and others who are very quiet and processing and perhaps aren't going to speak up at the moment. It doesn't mean, though, that they're not considering and would have valuable input. So this is a bit of a pet topic of mine anyway, because I think the quick thinkers amongst us, we're always the winners. We need ideas. We're going to brainstorm. So what's come out of the brainstorm? All the ideas are from the quick thinkers.
Yeah.
So the whole concept of equal voice, it's not just equal voice and giving people time in that moment to speak, it's giving them time to process so that they can speak.
Yeah, and I think this is those who think to speak, who might speak only at the very end of the workshop.
Or who may actually even need more time than that.
Yeah, that's
to process everything that's now happened, all the contributions, and to create a concept in their own mind, and then to have the opportunity to speak.
So this turns the entire concept of a one-off workshop on its head, right? So how do you create then, or would you already plan a follow-up to discuss everything that has all the afterglows and aftermath of a workshop?
If at all possible, I love doing a follow-up so that the positivity from the workshop can be reinforced, because then the likelihood that it's going to be lived or embodied by the participants is that bit higher. Yeah. And I play a very secondary role in this. I'm literally the sort of skeleton of a facilitator. I write stuff down. I make sure that whoever wants to speak gets a turn to speak and no one dominates the conversation. But my input is like turning the dial down. So ideally during a workshop in general, that is the way it feels to me. I will be front row, basically standing on the stage at the beginning where we're trying to get people to feel comfortable and develop enough trust or psychological safety within the room so people feel able to contribute. And then, of course, if I have certain input, that's going to be my contribution to them. But it's I always say, I come in with we're going to be looking at some things that you perhaps know less about, I know more about. That's my role. I'm here to ensure that we manage our time well, we're productive, and it's constructive. And then there's going to be all the input that you bring in.
Yeah.
And that there's the space for all of that together. So I try to make it very, very clear, I'm one element of the success and you are the rest, right from the beginning.
Yeah.
And then I'll be more active towards the initial stages of the workshop. But it's, again, turn the dial down. I just disappear more and more. It's an interesting thing that the whole concept of physical proximity is a super interesting one, I think. So when I think about the type of engagements I have, at the beginning, I'm standing very upright. I stand very close to people sometimes, or, move towards the group, move back. I'm not a good person to stand still. So there's a bit of movement there, but it's more sort of like gathering them around you. Sort of, come on, join in. It's okay, just take my hand, come on, little ones. But then as the workshop develops or the engagement develops, I will be standing back less. Or no, I will stand back more, totally confusing that. I will retreat from the group more and more. In the breaks, I pull the circle closer. So the participants are actually in a closer circle than they were, for instance. I might add a chair to the circle to close it, and I will sit on the chair with them. Or I will close it to the point where I sit on something else outside of the circle without being very obvious about it. And everything has been handed over to them and they've taken control. And that's just physical.
I love it. I love also the impact it has, whether you're part of the circle or not, and how you retrieve yourself slowly. It's funny, last week I recorded with Charles-Louis about the invisible facilitator.
Okay, yes. Yes. Okay.
Similar concept that actually if everything works well, we have done all the work beforehand, we hold the space, but then we become invisible. And I love how you describe the gradual invisibility and how you're very explicit about the roles and responsibilities at the beginning.
That's it, because they need your support. That's why you're there. Yeah. At the beginning. But when I think towards the end of the workshop, it's funny because the image I have in my mind is, you can see how I'm sitting on my son's gaming chair, which is incredibly comfortable. I
was wondering actually whether you were a gamer.
Like having a couch here. So you can see how I sit, or me, the way I normally stand behind the screen. At the end of a workshop, the image in my mind is this.
Very small, listening, like the thinker of Rodin.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yes.
That's right. Because it's not about me anymore. It's about them.
Yeah. And I now really become very, very conscious that I have a squeezed nerve and that my posture is not at all representing my state of being. But I love this last posture actually of the thinker, because I think also towards the end of the workshop, it's our task to synthesize and to find the common ground and to find the ending and maybe the jumping board to what comes next.
Mm-hmm. So I could honestly say I would be feeling very uncomfortable if at the end of an engagement, I'm standing very upright, I'm behaving in the same way I would at the beginning of an engagement, because for me, this means that we haven't progressed.
I love that. I haven't paid attention. I will.
Do. It's fascinating. And you may be doing it all already, you know?
Maybe I'm just thinking, and I wonder how this would translate in the online space, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's just because there we don't have the proximity, we cannot step in and out of the circle. But I think it's maybe the way we speak and how much we speak and how close or far away we are from the camera.
Absolutely. And this is really also a topic that I notice how I lean back. I seldom sit in calls, but how I will lean back, I'm on the screen, a smaller image. I will be taking the notes. It will be something I offer. You go ahead, you speak, I'll write up the action items, I'll do whatever, because it gives me a role and takes me out of the conversation. So I'm there as the support, I'm still there.
Yeah.
And I can step in with any questions or organizational details, or just ensuring that everybody does have an opportunity to speak, so the logistically.
And it helps them to really be in the conversation. It helps you to remain focused, because I can be very focused if I'm engaged in a conversation or if I'm taking notes or doing something, but just listening to a group conversation that I'm not part of, it's very difficult to stay focused without taking notes or doing something.
Indeed it is. And I think the contributions I would be making, so that was marvelous. I've added some notes. Please now, if I feel a short break would be good, take 2 minutes, read through the notes. What did I overhear? What do we still need to add? You tell me. So again, I'm handing it to them. What's missing? What do we still need to capture?
Yeah.
So giving them that role, literally handing the role over to them.
And do you experience that some groups are more open to this kind of approach than others? Because I also experienced that there are some groups who would literally call me in again and ask me for my opinion, my input. And I'm always very reluctant to give that. And I wonder what your experience is. When is it helpful and when would you do it? And when is it actually their distraction or even laziness?
So my thoughts on this are, what role do I have at this moment? Are they lost and need guidance? Is it so diverse, the thinking, that rather than give an opinion, we try to synthesize or find some sort of mutual concept within all of this? So they may ask me for my opinion, but I'm not giving my opinion. All I'm doing is working with what they've already into the space. And then if I share my opinion, I'll share it right at the very end, not to anchor people to my thinking. Because the role that you have when you're brought in as the facilitator is that you have more skills, more knowledge, more expertise in this field. So whatever you say is going to have weight.
Yeah.
And anchoring is an interesting topic anyway, and it's often, it can be between peers, it can be through a leadership role towards the team, but you're taking away the freedom to think very openly. If you have this role within the team where for whatever reason you have more power, just if we just use a generalized term, more power in some way, people's thinking, it's a bit like sort of flypaper. They're more stuck to your own thinking. They don't distance themselves from your thinking too much. So it's really important not to be the main voice in this, or the guiding voice, if you want them to truly consider
Yeah.
What could be the possibilities? How could we do this? And you want this very diverse. And then to let them think individually.
Yeah. Yes.
I put people into breakout rooms alone all the time. Or I send them off, of course, when we're in person, which is more and more again now.
Yeah.
Everyone goes and sits in a different corner, writes some notes, makes a couple of cards, then we gather.
I love that. And I think it's something that we are not using enough. Mm-hmm. And I wonder whether it's because as facilitators, we have the impression that we have to create this kind of group feeling. And I think especially when someone works in a corporate where it's constantly in meetings and constantly in conversation and together, that having a moment of self-reflection, mm-hmm. being alone with thoughts, having time to think, articulate, or maybe just enjoy a cup of tea.
Yes, exactly.
We would actually appreciate it, and we can dare to do this more.
I'm sure that often, and I feel like this, that I have to always watch myself because I tend to hover. I give people something to do and they're totally immersed in it. And then because I feel, okay, look, I'm being paid to be here. I'm mm-hmm. being paid to do this and it's working, but I still feel like, but how can I just hang around in the corner now for like an hour or what? It just feels so ridiculous. So I tend to sort of group hop and I really have to work on myself and I give everyone permission to time me out or just to point their finger to the door. If I'm coming in their direction, anyone can just point me away and I will turn instantly and walk away again.
Yeah. And isn't it funny that we have this feeling, yes, we have to work hard for the money.
Yes, I know.
And I think if space had a weight, so if we would literally hold space and feel the weight on our shoulders,
yes,
maybe we wouldn't feel as bad about standing in the corner.
That's such a lovely image. Here I am holding the space.
Yeah.
I love that image. We need to make t-shirts, Miriam.
Yes. The sweaty facilitator.
I am busy. Space. I'm holding the space.
Yeah. And because I think it's only between our ears, this overthinking. I don't think that any participant would sit there and like, why are we paying? Why are we paying them? They're not doing anything anyway. This would only come up if they're either bored or in a conversation that is actually going in the wrong direction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it really is a self-regulation topic. Mm. And I've never experienced that anybody has said, I wasn't present enough. Yeah. And as I say, I really need to control myself to leave people in peace and not disrupt.
Yes.
The process that's working really well, exactly as I'd hoped for, but and you know it yourself, sometimes groups, they're too focused on your input. Mm-hmm. The moment you appear, suddenly there's all these questions. Yes. Suddenly we need your thoughts. And they stop contributing themselves. So you need to stay away because if you do, they'll come with all that information and all that thinking and ideation themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I never go into a breakout room online. So I tell them, okay, if you need me, there's a rescue me, help me, call for me button.
Yes.
And even in this space, I would walk around. So come close, but never stop unless they call me. Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure that they see that I'm available.
Yes.
But then even standing there and listening, I might sometimes maybe stand so that I can hear a little bit just because I'm curious, but feel very weird about that as well. So I'm like, I don't want to spy on them.
No, exactly. If we come back to how you work in a physical manner, if a group calls me over and they're around a table, I will never take a chair. I will crouch down, probably at a corner somewhere. I'll be the smallest person in the group, almost. So I'm not invisible, but I'm literally trying to be as small of a presence as I can be, to try and avoid this automatic domination of where their thoughts are going and how you redirect them through your own input.
Yes, I can totally relate to that. And I think I've never done this consciously. Mm-hmm. But now that you mention it, that's exactly what I do. I always kind of go into my knees. I don't take a chair. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's because you feel what the space now needs.
Yeah.
What I find difficult is when I pass by a group and then I realize that they're totally getting, in air quotes, getting it wrong. So sometimes I realize, okay, so they're misinterpreting an activity and it's still useful.
Yes.
And sometimes it's not. And I find this extremely difficult, especially after facilitating so much online, because there I don't know anyway. So I cannot control. So how do you react if you realize that the group is...
So firstly,
derailing?
Yes, this happens all the time, as it does online too, and they groups return and they've done something entirely different. So the only thing I would try to do is see, is it a conversation that is giving them something? And you can see it on the energy. And even if it's just that they're connecting better, then I wouldn't interrupt at all. Maybe when we then come back together and each of the groups is doing a short debrief, I might introduce them as, and here's the group that has a slight variation on the topic because they're not aware that they're doing something else. And this is, again, usually just a way of everybody being very accepting, and it's very amusing usually.
Yeah. And sometimes I was just discussing with a colleague preparing a workshop where it's about building on each other's ideas. And I realized that having this component of misinterpreting an idea. So someone contributes an idea and then the others read it and can build on it. And very often we then have the urge to defend or explain, no, this is not what I meant. And I realized that actually the moment where someone builds on an idea in a way that is different from what the person owning the idea has had in mind is actually providing such a beautiful contribution.
Yes.
Because this is where a new perspective then comes in and can bring an idea to a totally different direction.
Absolutely. So I've never experienced that it hasn't been of value, the contribution that these variables have brought back. And for me, I always apologize that I clearly wasn't specific enough. It's no one's fault but my own. Either we didn't discuss it in enough detail, or the wording of the task itself wasn't clear enough. So it's me who's at fault, nobody else.
And I think being clear on instructions and sharing instructions one step at a time is so difficult for me.
You're not alone.
And to remember that, participants, they hear something and they get so excited that they immediately want to jump to action. And that it's our responsibility to provide them with information in a thoughtful manner.
Exactly. And nice and short and concise. So there's no ambiguity in the interpretation of the task. And particularly, I find, so I usually have some slides, if some description, but depending on how the actual engagement is going and what's emerging in the space, our focus may change very dramatically. And this is then, there's nothing prepared for this. But in my own mind, it's totally clear and logical. And why is this now more valuable than anything else? But there's so much going on in my own mind. I find it very difficult to just ground myself, slow down, communicate the absolute basics that they need and how they need to do it. And then I forget things like tell them how much time they have, or things like this. It's so clear to me. And I have to say that I would say is a personal challenge. Slow down, take everybody with you. I want to take them with me, but I'm not grounding myself enough first, is the way I would describe it. That's how it feels.
I can relate to that one. Just being so carried away, excited. Instead of just grounding and then giving the next instructions.
And I think the energy is contagious. So people are also excited, but they need the basics. So I don't know, maybe I should have a little basics list or something. Have you told them how long the exercise is? Do they really understand what it is?
A checklist. Yeah, that's another downside of being a quick thinker. You mentioned beforehand. So quick thinker, of course you see that something has to change now, immediately. And yes, you're right. And we have to then take it into account that others don't think as quickly.
So I think it's very destabilizing for some people when this happens and you suddenly shift and start doing something else. We've discussed what we're going to do. And I'm not being just unnecessarily spontaneous here. So this is really when I have the feeling like, okay, now it's clear what this is all about. So we're going to do something else instead, because that is now really going to solidify the value or consolidate what we're doing and not what was originally planned. But for some people, it's really like pulling the rug out from under their feet. They feel so disoriented with this, okay, pivot, turn, now run in that direction. That's how it feels.
Yeah, there might be even some grieving process related to that. Maybe they had an idea for the different, or they felt their comfort in knowing what's happening. And I think especially those who like more information, more control, then suddenly something happens. How would you deal with it? Do you have a trick to empathize with that?
A trick to empathize with them. What I have noticed is, in situations like this, I no longer stand in front of the group. I will take a chair and I will sit with them because it grounds me. It slows me down. I start speaking slower. I really notice this. I start speaking slower. I can have eye contact with everyone in the group. I can see you have a question, Miriam. Go ahead.
Yeah.
What would you like to know? How can I answer your question? Or at the end, I'm sure you have some questions.
Yeah.
Let's talk through them now. Who'd like to start?
Yeah.
So there's just ensuring that people feel comfortable enough and not so I'm the silly one who doesn't know how to do this exercise again.
Yeah. Or even ask someone to paraphrase and explain the activity in their words.
I would ask, would someone be generous enough to summarize what I just said? And people often step up for that. Or questions like, what still needs to be said? What still needs to be asked?
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what still needs to be said is always when I close something out. That's the final question I'll ask. And again, it can be incredibly diverse what comes back.
Yeah.
But valuable. It's always valuable. Everything is valuable.
Because it's also the moment where maybe the conversation is not over yet.
Yes.
And then it's the moment to state it before moving on. That's where the golden nugget might lie.
I can give you an example. And this is again with the group I mentioned before that has these sort of difficult dynamics within their own team communication. We'd had a very productive session. As I said, everyone experienced it as pleasant, and it was an eye-opener that we can engage with each other in this way. Before we finished out, there was just one last little thing we had to do, and we just sort of closing this session. And I said, what still needs to be said? And one person said, I need an answer to my email. And it was the strangest thing. So then the question came up, yes, what email and what do you mean? And there was a short, I sent you all an email. I only have 75% of the answers. That says a lot about the type of person we're talking about. And then people said, okay, yes, sorry, I was busy. I saw it. I didn't realize it was me, and all of this sort of thing. And then the head of the team said, okay, don't worry. Well, anyone who hasn't answered will now answer it. And for them, the matter was closed. And I said, stop. That's not what we're talking about here. And I asked this person and I said, you said you need an answer to your email, but what's behind that? What's the topic here? And he said, respect.
Ooh.
It's so disrespectful to me that I make the effort, I share it with you, and people can't even take the time to respond. So these are these, as you say, golden nugget. This was a turning point for the team.
Yes. And this is, for me, exemplifies the high art of facilitation.
Yes.
That it's not just, okay, check the box. You got your answer. No, what is actually behind it? And ask the question that nobody would have even thought of. And I guess even the person who brought that up, they didn't think about opening that box and articulating it, but you gave them the opportunity to.
Exactly. Because when I asked, what's it really about? You could see how he was thinking. And then he said, it's about respect. Yeah. And that really, it was almost like a sort of like a physical wave within the group, one of these very impactful moments where you can just feel the air and everything around you changes.
Did someone say something, or how was it received by the group? Because I can imagine that either they're like, oh my goodness, yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Or it can also open the defensiveness.
No, it didn't.
Oh, okay, beautiful.
Luckily, we had such a pleasant environment by that point. It was, and it wasn't even a, oh my goodness, thank you moment. It was really like, oh.
I haven't seen that perspective.
This deep reflective moment that kicked off really a process of reflection. And really, the funny thing was that with this group, we began the workshop and there were 5 people who said workshops are a total waste of time. So exactly what you were saying at the beginning. And I'm just very open. I said, thank you. Thank you for sharing. It's good to know how you're feeling about this. And I'm not going to try and convince you otherwise. But it's helpful when people say, like, it won't change anything anyway. And I said, you know what? I totally agree with you. If we do nothing, nothing will change. Beautiful. That's my standard answer to this sort of thing. Because they're entitled to their opinion and it's experience that has taken them to this place and that perspective. But now I've lost track. What was I going to say?
Respect, you came all the way to have that.
Yes, no. And we had these people. The respect chap was also a workshops are a waste of time. And we closed out literally maybe 10 minutes later, and they all wanted a part 2. Even the naysayers wanted a part 2. And I think this was just, but I could imagine it because it was so pleasant being with them. It was such a good atmosphere. And it was so sort of wishing each other well type of atmosphere, warm and welcoming. And I don't know if they've ever experienced something like that.
And especially when you're actually experiencing this team as having difficulty in conversing respectfully with each other. Yeah. And then you're creating a space for them to actually find hope.
This is it.
This something else
exactly it.
And that's worth so much because, I mean, I believe that burnout doesn't happen because too much work, but because of toxic environments. Mm-hmm. And then if they can just find a little bit more joy in going to work and a little bit less pressure and less toxicity, this is worth so much.
Mm-hmm. Interestingly, now there is going to be a part 2 of the workshop. And in the meantime, they had a team internal discussion and 3 people were back on the no, we don't need another workshop and it's a waste of time.
Ooh.
Which is perfectly okay. It's just very interesting to observe that because there was no pressure on anybody to toe the line. Everybody could be open, and the people who were anti-workshops are very outspoken people. But even in that workshop environment, even they were on board. And now I suspect that they're reverting a bit back to type and the type of interactions that are standard for them.
Yeah, which also makes me think of the saying that we have to have 4 positive experiences to cancel out a negative one. Is it 4? Is it 7? I don't know. It's
a high number of positives versus negatives. And this was certainly the additional hurdle that we have with this team, because it wasn't clear in advance if the possibility was there to have a second workshop. That there was a lot of unanswered questions and open and will it be non and uncertainty around the whole thing, because we shouldn't have allowed much time to pass.
Yeah.
So now we've got reverting back to type, which I'm sure is what's going on to a certain extent. And it would have been more valuable if we could have got people together much, much quicker.
Yeah.
To consolidate on what they'd already established and take those next steps and just get that feeling more normalized.
Such a good learning. Such a good learning, not to let it just revert to the good old, how we've always done it.
Yeah.
Because also I think it's so easy to then think, just the hormones, or it was a workshop spirit, or too much sugar and all of that. And then it's so easy to forget.
Yes.
What it really was.
Yes, and then it just goes back into what have you experienced the most, and those are the disappointing workshops that have no impact, and then you're immediately back in that box.
Yeah.
It was a feel-good moment and has no lasting impact.
Yeah.
So, but those are the challenges that we face, and if we're realistic and observant as facilitators to what are our own goals in what we see and how we converse with our clients, and what seems to be realistic outcomes or not, and how much do I communicate this with the client, how much is something for me to be aware of and observant of during the whole engagement, and then reflecting afterwards. That's as important as workshop preparation. That's part of your workshop preparation. It's got to be.
Yeah, which brings us full circle, right? This open conversation with the clients of what will happen during the workshop and also after, and to prep some time for that.
Yep.
What makes you consider a workshop as a failure?
So personally, I consider it a personal failure if I have been blind to the conversations that were going on, if I was not able to pick up on the lack of intention behind everything. So, and that's happened to me on several occasions where I'm saying, I think I'm just a bit sort of very optimistically driven and naive and gullible. I'd say naive and gullible, that I do believe, not always and now and less and I'm more cautious about, is this a real intervention? Or is it just a look good intervention? Or in fact, even a this better not work intervention? So that I see as a personal failure. For people to leave any type of intervention or engagement looking confused, looking disappointed, making the impression that they're excluded, that is for me also a failure. Even if it's the people who are perhaps a little more contentious than others. As again, everybody has their reasons for showing up the way they do. And that's not for me to judge. It's to help the whole environment. So how can we as a mix of people engage well together? Yeah. So even if they then leave, I'm sure you know it, in a lot of situations, people come and talk to you and they're like, that person's so impossible to work with. No. That doesn't matter when they look unhappy, and who cares? Yeah, I care. I don't think that's okay. I just don't.
And it has an impact. I mean, it's part of the group dynamics.
Exactly.
And if there's one person, even if they always look unhappy, it does something with the group. And there might be a reason why they're always looking unhappy.
Exactly. And these are the interesting tools that you use where that is naturally exposed. And I say exposed in a way that perhaps this person comments on something, brings something up. There's this new insight that no one would ever have guessed. And back to the golden nuggets.
You might see something that no one else sees. And I think that's why also an external facilitator is so important, because very often these teams, this person always does that. And I remember me being in that position when I was still in a day job. There was this one person, he was so annoying, always. And everyone started rolling their eyes, me included, when he only opened his mouth. And then there was this one moment where I realized, that was good. That was important what he just said. And then I started doubting how many times have I just stopped listening just because of these preconceptions. And I think as an external facilitator, when we come in, we have the opportunity to break the dynamic, take away the judgment from single individuals, and point out if they do contribute something useful.
That's it. Or give them the space to show how useful their contribution is, whilst giving everyone else potentially more space than they usually have.
The beauty of facilitation.
Love it. Best job ever.
I can tell.
Yep.
Wow. Thank you so much for this exploration.
It was a wonderful conversation, Miriam. Lots of things to reflect on for myself again.
Yeah, same here.
And to take with me to my next facilitations.
Yay.
So thank you for inviting me. Really very grateful to have had the opportunity to just explore this topic in this way.
Thank you, Tanja. Thank you for staying tuned and for listening until the very end. I hope that you found the inspiration and the wisdom that you are looking for. And I hope that you will subscribe to the show so that you never miss any of the interviews with another inspiring facilitator from across the world. I'm devoted to continue this podcast and to deliver weekly an episode that maintains the quality that you expect and you deserve. And if you would like to help me to maintain this quality and to keep the podcast free, please help us. Visit workshops.work/support to make a small donation to keep the podcast free. Thank you so much. I hope to be in your ears next week.